Sci-fi.
Yes.
Sci-fi.
Are we actually on?
We are on,
Oh,
yes.
yeah, okay.
Yes. That was what the noise was
okay.
for. Yes.
I was still thinking about Magneto and his merry men.
You were thinking about Magneto and his merry men. That wasn't what you just said. You suggested
it's carried on in its own.
Magneto and his merry men, given that it's Ian McKellen, would obviously have a different connotation to it. Again, let's not think about that.
Yeah.
Get into
or
dodgy.
later where we were alone.
Possibly, yeah.
It could be the other Magneto. It could be the young one off of thing.
The young Magneto.
Yes, off of X-Men 2, whatever the hell it is.
X-Men First Class.
That's the one.
I've not seen X-Men First Class.
That's good.
Oh right, I was going to say I watched X3 and then just thought I'm done with this franchise.
Yeah, no, the first one's good. It's quite Austin Powers, but it knows it is, but it's not being kind of stupid.
Right.
It's just kind of gone, let's make a 60s spy movie only with superheroes in.
Okay, so when you suggested that the vague kind of talking point for this particular one should be what the hell has happened to sci-fi, I think you just kind of answered our questions really.
Yes.
It's pretty much descended into complete stupidity.
Yeah, and self-referencing and
self-parody.
So yeah.
Well, there's not really a lot to take the piss out of then, is there? I think sci-fi is doing a very good job of taking the piss out of itself.
Yeah, I mean
by the sounds of it.
The new Star Trek is virtually Galaxy Quest.
What, Star Trek Into Darkness?
Yeah.
I was going to say because the first,
the
reboot,
the new reboot series.
Yes.
So the first two films.
Yeah, it basically is Galaxy Quest.
Yeah,
I'd agree
they
with
know.
that.
Yeah, they're making all the jokes.
Yeah, only it doesn't realise it is.
But the people in it don't realise it is. But Scotty was kind of silly as well.
He is, yeah.
Forget the original Scotty did bang his head on one of the bulkheads.
Yes, that was Star Trek 5 and that doesn't count.
It does.
No, Star Trek 5 does not count.
Which one's Star Trek 5?
Star Trek 5 is where they go searching for God.
Oh yeah.
But either way, it's just kind of like, it is the dumbest of the Star Trek movies, and that's saying quite a bit.
Have you read any of his books?
No, I haven't. What, like
Star Trek? No, the ones where he comes back to life in Star Trek.
Oh right, okay.
The ones where he's done his own sequel to Star Trek Generations, where
Kirk doesn't die by falling off a bridge.
Kirk dies falling off a bridge.
Right.
Spoiler alert. But gets resurrected by the Borg in order to help them take over the universe, but then gets de-Borgified and is therefore still alive and basically kind of run around saving the universe again in the Next Generation era.
And are these books canon?
No.
No.
Because the whole, basically whenever he runs into anybody they're like, oh Kirk, you're so brilliant, I wish I was as brilliant as you. And it's Picard, who is way more brilliant.
Yeah, I was going to say, you do realise that if anybody is actually watching this, that will get comments.
Oh, it's not canon. I don't care.
Well, no, not that. That Picard is more brilliant than Kirk.
He is.
He is.
Deal with it.
Sorry, he is.
Yeah.
He's, for a start, I mean, even from a kind of narrative, not even narrative, a performance point of view, he's a better actor.
Yeah, he's massively a better actor.
He's also much smarter, and he doesn't knob every green thing with a vagina that comes his way.
Yeah, he's just generally better at his job.
What was the question again?
What's happened to sci-fi?
What's happened to sci-fi?
Yes.
Yeah, that was the question, wasn't it?
Yes. Well, should we talk about why we're talking about it?
We should, yeah.
Because we haven't done an intro or anything.
No,
we just kind of started talking about.
Yeah, well, I was going to say
Magneto and his merry dwarves.
Magneto and his dwarfs. Yes. Obviously, we're talking. We're talking specifically about sci-fi because our dear friend, the extremely horizontal Mr. Fish, he foolishly decided not to wake up one morning.
Yeah, which is a silly thing to do.
Which very, very silly thing to do. Was obviously probably one of the biggest sci-fi nuts we know.
Yeah.
Specifically Doctor Who.
Yes.
But obviously he also loved his sort of like, well, I mean, obviously given when he grew up, he loved things like Blake 7.
Yeah. Space 1999 was
Space 1999, I think he was into as well, yeah. Yeah, obviously Star Trek, because pretty much everybody is into sci-fi. Not so much Star Wars, because that's not science fiction. Star Wars is basically...
It's a fairy tale set in space.
It is, yeah. It's basically a children's fairy tale with puppets set in space.
Yeah.
And it's not as good as Star Trek.
See, I want to argue against that.
Yeah, if we have to take them as a body of work on their whole and what they represent, then that's fine. Obviously, Star Trek, yes, we have to include Enterprise when we say Star Trek as a whole, but even when you take into account Enterprise, there's still enough of Star Trek that, taken as a whole, it's better than Star Wars. Star Wars has some more kind of, I would say, killer moments.
Yeah, but a lot of it just doesn't make any sense at all.
Yes.
Most of the dialogue is awful. And
there's not enough good ideas to last that long. I think it's like a very thin spread of butter.
Yeah, I mean, basically, Return of the Jedi. I actually, and in the minority, I like Return of the Jedi the best. But
I would say, that's definitely a minority.
But Return of the Jedi is basically a mashup of the other two films.
It is, yes.
Let's take all the good bits. Let's
Yeah.
take all the fighty bits and the explodey bits and the kind of big tromping around fighty monster tank things and the Death Star
power. And a whole
power.
load of shit bits. Because to be fair, yes, it is essentially a retread of the first two movies, only it doesn't have any of the dramatic kind of, the sort of really good sort of, dramatic storyline that Empire had. It didn't have as much innocence and fun as the original had. It just seemed like a mashup.
Yeah, I still like it the best. I don't know why. I probably can't defend it.
It's well, no, I'm not.
And
I'm not
a lot of Empire doesn't make sense either.
No, it doesn't. I'm not suggesting that you should. It's just I think what I didn't like about it was the fact that basically this Galactic Empire built this most sort of like phenomenal weapon in the first movie. Got their arses roundly kicked and then decided, right, okay, what are we going to do this time?
Make another
we'll
one.
Make it exactly the same mistake again. Exactly the same mistake again.
Yeah.
Obviously, we've discussed this before, that when that Death Star exploded, it would have peppered Endor with gigantic chunks of fiery hot death.
Yeah.
It would have pretty much wiped out most of the life on that planet.
Yeah, it's kind of depressing.
Yeah, I mean, it would be no different from our moon exploding in close proximity, I would think. It certainly wouldn't work out well for the environment.
No. Chairs,
janitors.
Yeah, the canteen.
See, you never see the canteen on the Death Star. You never see the janitors. There's a lot of corridors, a lot of hallways that need cleaning.
Those big crushy rubbish bins that have the big giant penis worm in, them.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, all of those things would blow up quite conventionally.
Yes. I always wondered, ever since I was a kid, basically the kind of gigantic trash compactor scene in Star Wars, why absolutely every single piece of rubbish they've ever thrown away is made of rubber and polystyrene. Because it's all foam. You can see it's all foam as they're bouncing around on it.
Yeah, because it was made in the 1970s.
So was I. Okay, so far we've not actually mentioned a single piece of sci-fi from current era, because all of them, there just seems to be a point. I think this is what you originally wanted to get at with what has happened to sci-fi, is it seems to have gotten to a point and then stopped.
Yeah.
In that basically we don't get any real sci-fi films or sci-fi TV anymore in the traditional sense of sci-fi.
Yeah, there's no big space opera stuff set in the future.
No. You could probably say Battlestar Galactica, but that's just a remake anyway.
And also that's set in the past.
And it's set in the past.
Yeah, and actually the big kind of... That was such a stupid idea, because everybody knows. Everybody who would have gone, I know what, I'll watch Battlestar Galactica, because would have known that it was a rehash of the original series. Where the point was that
they'd get to Earth.
Yeah, that they would get to Earth, and that they weren't
Spoilers.
on Earth.
Yeah.
They weren't us. So everything about it, I can't actually watch any of it, because everything I'm watching is going, so it's meant to be...
I know the ending, I know the ending.
I know the ending, and also they're not us. Why are they dressed like us?
There will be no surprises.
Yeah, but I can't get over the. I mean, one of the things you have to do with all sci-fi is suspension of disbelief.
Well, yes, because you're
And
dealing
that's
with
okay.
high concept.
Yeah, and that's okay. I mean, you know, the TARDIS is bigger on the inside. Okay, Tom Baker gave us an explanation of why that is in about 1978, but also which didn't make any sense, but it doesn't really matter.
No.
But also the reason why the TARDIS is bigger on the inside is narrative causality. It's because TARDISes are bigger on the inside.
Yes.
And we just kind of go, okay, it just is. Right, fine, next. Where are they going to go?
Yes, well, as long as you're consistent within the rules of your own universe, and
Yeah.
that's fine. But I mean, sci-fi suffers from that more than probably anything.
Yeah.
Because obviously you're dealing with high concepts, so you have to create far more of the rules of your universe than you would if you were setting your story in the present day in a school or something
Yeah.
like that. Basically, we all know what a school is, we all know what the rules are, we all know the society we live in.
Yeah.
But when you're dealing with sci-fi, you're having to invent more of it from whole cloth.
Yeah.
So obviously it's more important that you stick to the rules you create,
Yeah.
and as long as you do, you're fine. It's when it starts to fall apart is when you start completely making shit up.
Yeah.
Hello, George Lucas.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh right, well, we're gonna. Oh yeah, actually, we've got this mystical force.
This mystical force is actually a blood disorder.
Yeah, I don't
Right.
want to know why you. Yeah, that immediately just when I saw that on the first prequel, I was just
It's like, I'm done.
yeah,
Yeah.
basically,
I'm
yeah. I
out
don't
of
want.
here.
I don't want that. That's not what I want.
No.
And
I mean, he could have gotten away with it if he was actually a half decent writer. He could have gotten away with it and basically sort of said that kind of we don't know what the force is.
yeah,
Or how it works, but the
But-
one thing we do know is that the people who have a particularly good command of it and an understanding and feeling for the Force tend to have a particular high account of this thing in their blood. It's almost
Yeah.
as if the Force affects them physically as
Yeah.
well as mentally and everything else. And he could have gotten away with
Yeah,
that. He
but
could have said that basically the midi-chlorians bullshit was actually a symptom.
I can't
It's
even
a
deal with the word.
No, a symptom of it just sounds like sort of tiny little things living in pools. Yeah. Also, when they finally ended up on Earth, we suddenly then basically forgot everything
Yeah.
for millennia. Basically, how to dress, how to communicate,
And then
in
re-remembered it
English,
again.
how to build spaceships, how to travel vast interstellar distances, and then suddenly over the course of millennia we started to learn it again. It's kind of like
Yeah, in exactly the same way.
it's in terms of basically kind of like you're pulling this out of your ass, this is stupid. It's right up there with Scientology, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just kind of like, this is clearly fucking stupid. This
Yeah.
is clearly mad sci-fi from somebody who doesn't understand how to actually write sci-fi. And I'm not
Yeah.
honestly criticising Battlestar Galactica for that. It's just that ending never really kind of sold me.
No.
Right, even in the original, the idea that we kind of like sort of came from this lot, it's kind of like, really, it's there's that jump you have to make of basically kind of like, yeah, they landed, but basically suddenly we forgot everything for ages and ages
Yeah.
and ages. It's like, that's the bit I have trouble with, and I think that's where the disbelief tends to go.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
I can get Planet of the Apes better as an ending.
Yeah.
It's a very similar idea.
The original one.
Yes.
Yeah.
A very similar idea that basically he's pissed off at,
Yeah,
to Mars and
yes,
when he's
it's
come
actually
back.
got proper physics in. If you travel very close to the speed of light in a big loop,
Yes.
then you will get time dilation. It will
Yeah,
will
you will
pass
come
slower
back
on your
hundreds,
spaceship.
thousands of years into
in
the future. Yeah, that actually works.
Yeah, that's how you do time travel.
Okie dokie, yeah. I think I can kind of see what's happened to sci-fi and how we can answer the question what happened to it. It got
a bit
really
silly.
It got a bit silly and expensive. And I
Yeah,
think, because obviously, the kind of the big era for sci-fi would have been the 50s and the 60s. I would say
I'd probably go with probably
in terms
60s,
of the
70s.
visual, in terms of putting it on screen, because obviously
Yeah.
in the 50s you had all the
Actually,
massive
yeah, 'cause-
RKO movies,
Yeah,
well, 40s and 50s even, but I think sort of post-war, and you had all the kind of the 50s, like Day the Earth Stood Still, and
Yeah.
into the 60s and things like that, and obviously War of the Worlds was 1953.
yeah,
So you had all throughout the 50s and the 60s, and it was, I think, most
Yeah,
of the
so
50s
got-
you would have had the kind of invasion sci-fi,
yeah,
because you were
which is
dealing
Cold
with
War.
Cold War paranoia.
And then you've got
and then
we were all
60s
going to space sci-fi because they had the space race and stuff.
Exactly.
Was moving so fast.
That's right. In the 60s, basically, it was all Star Trek and Apollo moon landings and stuff like that. So it was all kind of like, it was all very bright and cheerful and positive.
Yeah.
And then into the 70s, it got slightly sort of bleaker.
Yeah,
I think
space
into the
opera
70s,
pretty much died off, and you got stuff like
it's all kind
Silent
of like
Green. It was all kind of
it's
bleak
all
and
dystopian. Yeah, well, they went dystopian because obviously
Yeah.
everybody was kind of like, yeah, we've seen our planet from space now, and we've kind of realised that we're basically making a balls of it. So yeah, we need to sort the planet out, and everybody got a little bit sort of bummed out
Yeah.
in the 70s by this idea that kind of, you know, sort of like we might be knackering the planet.
Yeah.
Because that's really what I think the 70s was when the environmental
Yeah.
movement kicked off big time, and
where there was the oil crisis.
you got oil crisis and energy problems in general and things like
the
that.
Cold War was looking like it was going to kick off any second.
Yeah, so
yeah,
it
it
got
was just
dystopian and yeah, and then kind of like the 80s, it just got really, didn't it just get big and dumb?
Yeah, because basically Star Wars invented the summer blockbuster.
Jaws did, really.
Yeah, but those two films together.
Those two, 75 and 77, that's what pretty much.
Where you've got basically filmmakers stopped making films like Taxi Driver and things like that, where it was asking you to actually think.
Yeah, it's now a case of throw as many awesome effects at the screen as you possibly can.
And you've got the stupid 80s action movies that we've kind of talked about, where you've got loads of stuff blowing up, and then there's a shagging scene for no particular reason, and then loads more stuff blows up.
Yes. Yeah. But yeah, I think, what was it, sci-fi of the 80s? I think the best you had was Back to the Future.
Yeah, which was actually what we're looking at now, which is sci-fi set in the modern day.
Yeah.
Because we've gone past actually the year that a lot of sci-fi is set in.
Yeah.
So Space 1999, that was 16 years ago.
Yes.
And we haven't got any of that stuff yet. 2001.
We didn't have our Space Odyssey.
No.
We didn't have 2010, Jupiter didn't implode and become a second sun.
No.
Which was massively disappointing, because that would have been awesome.
Yeah. We haven't got any flying cars like
we've got no flying cars, no hoverboards.
We have got mobile phones. I mean, when's Total Recall?
Total Recall is back to 2060s, something like that.
Alright, so it's a bit further forward.
A bit further away.
Yeah.
But no Running Man is around about 2017, so a couple of years away from Running Man.
Blade Runner is 2019.
Yeah, Blade Runner's obviously not far off as well.
Yeah.
So we're kind of there.
Yeah.
Without not actually being there.
Yeah, and any sci-fi, I mean, we do live in quite a sci-fi world in that we've got instantaneous communication across the planet. We've all got little computers that we carry around with us.
As I say, you've got tablet devices here.
I mean, so like kind of thing.
This was some guy's kind of like idea. It's like sort of like, what should we do for the next generation of Star Trek? Well, let's give them these little flat things. It's like, oh yes, let's do.
Yeah, but the ones in Star Trek have got buttons on. I mean, these are more like the ones in 2001.
Yeah.
Where they've got. I mean, 2001, we could build that spaceship now, apart from the murderous artificial intelligence, which we haven't worked out how to make yet, which would be a good thing.
No, that's probably a good idea.
Totally
if we stay clear of that.
We probably could have. That was probably based on a decent extrapolation of 1960s technology.
I don't know how far we are away from building murderous artificial intelligence. I think we've definitely built things that could inspire murder. Anything that Microsoft chucked out, for example. There is plenty of software that has made me gleefully want to strangle someone.
Yes, it's the murdering, it's the artificial intelligence doing the murdering. Though.
Yeah, rather than kind of sort of saying, hey, kill that guy. Could it be also that because we've arrived at the future, we are in the future.
We are.
Although I am not ever going to do the kind of the really horrible comedy cliche thing of basically kind of like sort of, we're in the future, where's my jetpack?
You're never going to have a jetpack.
You're never going to have a jetpack, and stop trotting out that horrible fucking cliche.
It wasn't going to happen unless where's my jetpack when in the same place that your legs have just been burnt off. Okay?
Yes.
It's not going to
happen. Like, look, we can barely prevent, kind of accidents on the roads when people are allowed to drive vehicles. Personalised flying machines are a really, really bad idea given the population of the planet and how arseholey people can be behind the wheel of a car.
All I've got to say is, like, Top Gear, can you imagine them putting the stick on a jetpack and going, let's see how fast it goes around one track?
Yes. I think that the predictions of sci-fi and the predictions of programs like Tomorrow's World and the people in the 50s and so on looking forward to kind of like how we're going to be living in this century were so absurdly wide at the mark that nobody now wants to be seen to be making any kind of real solid prediction for 50, 100 years down the road because of how stupid they are going to look. I mean, it's probably not happening at any kind of real conscious level, but if you think about it, nobody's predicting too far ahead. Because obviously technology that we've got now, I mean, 50 years ago nobody would have predicted something like a tablet computer.
Yeah, and actually probably 20 years ago people wouldn't have.
Would have been the 80s when Star Trek Next Generation, when they had the kind of tablet things in there. So at best they were kind of, I mean, they were obviously thinking kind of like, you know, many millennia in the future. But you look at shows like sort of Red Dwarf and other stuff, and there's still video cassettes.
Yeah, and they've got
400 years into the future.
Yeah, and that was partly because they had no money. But I mean, they've actually got Commodore VIC-20s.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a VIC-20 in the drive room, isn't there?
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, the original Star Trek had tablet computers. It had the electric clipboard.
Yes.
That Kirk was always having to sign stuff on. So
I was going to say, it's like sort of signing off some boring kind of sort of clipboard things like, love Jim Kirk.
Here's my phone number.
Yeah, expenses. It's his expenses form, isn't it?
121 anti-radiation condoms.
Yes, I was going to say lube.
It's suspension of disbelief again. I mean, they do cover in the original series. They are making comments about racism and civil rights and stuff like that, a lot of the time by the way that the human crew relate to Spock.
Yeah.
Because there is a lot of prejudice.
Well, that was Roddenberry's favourite character, and he refused to let the show go on if NBC wanted to, because NBC wanted to ditch
they didn't want him to be in it at all, did they?
Spock,
they looked like the devil.
And Gene Roddenberry said that he wouldn't do it unless he could keep him, which was fair enough. But, I mean, he was narrative device again. And the whole thing anyway, really, when you think about it, is a case of, okay, we're basically going to put an Asian guy, we're going to put a Russian guy.
Which in the 60s was a massive deal.
That was a big deal. A black woman.
Yeah.
I do get, obviously it has been sort of done as something of a joke that's kind of like, oh yeah, so like, you know, Mr. Scott, the engineer, you know, kind of like, you know, Mr. Sulu, you know, in command of the thing, you know, driving, and, you know, even the Russian guy gets a good job. It's like, you're the woman, basically sit in the corner and be the secretary.
Yeah.
It's like, no, that's not her role on the thing at all.
No.
If you've watched it and seen it as that, you've totally missed the point.
Yeah.
The point is that she's supposed to be kind of like an incredibly gifted linguist. She can speak all these varying different languages, can communicate in these things. She's just, you know, it's like she's not the bloody receptionist.
No, if anything, Yeoman Rand is the receptionist.
Exactly.
She's the one who turns up with the clipboard and says, sign this.
That's right. Uhura is basically the first point of contact. Basically, she is the diplomat welcoming you to her country.
Yeah.
It's kind of like whenever some dignitary goes visiting, they're the first person they meet before they meet the king / president, head of state. It's kind of like, you know, so like, you know, welcome, we'll arrange things later on for you. Basically, they're the ones who are deemed to be kind of like, you know, kind of like they're our top person.
Yeah.
For basically being the first point of contact for all these other people. Okay, it does annoy me. I mean, it's always been a bit of a joke. Obviously, yes, there is kind of like, you could sort of say, yeah, stick her in a short skirt. But to be fair, it was the 1960s.
Yeah.
Everybody was in a sodding short skirt.
Yeah, except Spock.
Except Spock. Although, no, he had long dresses.
Yeah, because their dress uniforms were actually dresses.
Yes.
And in the first series, God, we've really watched too much of this.
We definitely watched too much of this.
In the first series of The Next Generation, you would occasionally see male characters walking around in the background in the short skirt uniform.
Yeah.
So they kind of clearly...
Yeah, now that was weird when you're watching Star Trek in 1987 and basically there are blokes wandering around in skirts.
Yeah, well I was kind of like, yay, we'll be able to do that in the future.
Yeah, I was just sat there thinking kind of like, not so much kind of like yay, and not so much kind of, but at the same time thinking kind of like, do they realise that looks silly?
Oh yeah, it did look silly. That's probably why a lot of
it's
stuff
like,
doing
you know,
it.
so like, by all means, wear a skirt if you want. Don't give a shit. But the thing is, it just looked a little bit silly in Star Trek.
Yeah.
So the guys, I don't think it was more that it wasn't the fact that it was a skirt. It was the fact that it was that skirt.
Yeah.
It was the fact that the uniform didn't quite carry it off.
We couldn't quite work it. I mean,
No,
yeah,
it was clearly extras basically who didn't have enough of, you know, that kind of like fabulousness to actually carry off a skirt.
Yeah.
It's kind of like some people could have got away with it.
I can't see why you can't carry off a skirt in a kind of macho sort of a way.
Well, generally the only way you can actually do that is if you're doing something like Alexander. If you're doing something like ancient Greece, Sparta,
Oh, right, yeah.
sort of things like that. If you're basically doing the kind of like, the only reason that I'm wearing a skirt in this movie is because historically I would have actually done this naked, but the world isn't really ready for us doing a movie of that just yet.
We start switching about all over the place. We would have had to put blurry blobs on.
Yeah. Yeah, 300 would have been a very different film.
Yeah.
But yeah, there would have been a lot of sort of swinging blurry shapes.
Yeah.
And a lot of buggery as well.
Yes, lots of bum sex.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will basically say that I think the last great bit of sci-fi we really had was probably Farscape. In terms of TV or movies.
Yeah, and it did take a lot of the silly ideas that are taken far too seriously in things like Star Trek.
Yes.
And really kind of stick a flag on the silliness and point
Yeah,
at it and go,
it was
this is very silly.
Yeah, it was unapologetic in basically pointing out how silly things were.
Yeah.
You obviously have the character of John Crichton who's there. John Crichton? Yeah,
Yeah.
it was John Crichton. I can never remember whether his name is John. I keep thinking of Michael Crichton, Jurassic Park.
Or Crichton off of Red Dwarf.
Or Crichton off of Red Dwarf, yeah. Yes, John Crichton. As basically kind of like clearly sort of like obviously sort of, you know, imbued with all this kind of like all the baggage of grown up watching Star Trek.
Yeah,
so he's in a universe where there is Star Trek. He's in it's our universe.
Yeah, and that was probably the first sci-fi thing because they did it in Buffy, where they acknowledged that everybody's grown up watching this stuff. But yeah, it was probably the sci-fi thing that had actually got people in it who'd heard of sci-fi.
Yes.
So he would be making references to Star Wars or Star Trek or
exactly, and I
stuff.
think in doing that they were able to avoid most of the cliches, and where they weren't, they were able to make fun of them.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably how it managed to get away with it. It was kind of like the 90s when you started getting all the kind of like the horror movies that were self-referential.
Yeah.
I think there was only so long that was going to last, and similarly the same with Farscape. There's only so long you could basically make something that was going to essentially be sort of, you know, this sort of very kind of self-referential and postmodern before people would get tired of it and see through it. I think it just stuck around just long enough, and then after that it's a case of, well, what do you do now? Because everything is like, well, go back to the cliches from 50 years ago. Yeah,
and actually, another thing that Farscape did, which was probably one of the first things to do it was sci-fi set in the present.
Yeah.
He wasn't in the future. He wasn't kind of in sort of 2160 something.
No, it was. Present day.
Yeah, it was present day.
How far have we wandered off the point?
Oh, all of the far.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. We haven't even mentioned Doctor Who.
No, well, Doctor Who is actually...
It's Doctor Who.
Doctor Who is Doctor Who, but it's generally the problem that we're talking about is that it's mostly set in the present.
Yeah.
They occasionally go into the past. They don't really go into the future that much.
No, they just go somewhere else.
Yeah, or if they
they tend not to go into the future of our world because it's always risky to predict.
Yeah, and they've decided, and they have made quite a clever decision in that they've just decided we're not going to try and guess. We're not going to put everybody in spandex space robes in the future anymore.
No.
We're just going to kind of put them in trousers.
It's one of the sort of named tropes, isn't it, on TV tropes? One of the classics is basically in the future everything's made of tinfoil.
Is it? Yeah, yeah.
And it is basically everything everybody's wearing is always shiny and silver.
Yeah, and
at least Doctor Who has pretty much kind of abandoned that probably 20 years ago. Certainly in the current sort of Russell T Davies and Moffat era.
Yeah, I mean they do seem to have decided that in the future everybody's going to dress like Victorians.
Yes.
Which is a bit weird.
It is a bit weird.
Because why would you do that?
It's also getting slightly repetitive to see a sodding dinosaur crop up again and again.
Yeah. Well, there haven't been that many dinosaurs.
There's definitely been a few in Doctor Who of this era, haven't there?
There's been... Well, there was the big... Oh, yeah, well, there was dinosaurs on a spaceship.
Yes.
It's
cool. Look, we can render dinosaurs now. It's like, yes,
Yeah.
we know you've been able to do it for 20 years.
Yeah. There was
Like,
the
for
big
TV.
giant... There was the really over-the-toply, inaccurately big dinosaur.
Yeah, obviously there was one in Capaldi's introduction episode.
Yeah,
his
that
first
one.
episode.
Yeah.
When I saw that,
The
that just
big
annoyed me.
T-Rex.
That just annoyed me. It's kind of like, it's just like, I will say that I think Capaldi has the makings of a genuinely great Doctor, but unfortunately, based on the first series that he's had so far, with some of the ropiest scripts that they've turned out over the years, he's not been given much of a chance. I think he needed some of the kind of like the really good solid scripts that Tennant and Matt Smith were getting. Obviously not Matt Smith in his final season, because that was pretty crappy as well.
Which one was that one? That was the Impossible Girl thing, wasn't it? Where it was... Yeah,
Yes.
they kind of... Well, they have explained now how Clara turned up, but... then they just kind of left it.
It still smacks of basically kind of like they absolutely hit gold with Amy Pond.
Yeah,
I
she
think.
put it.
I would think her story tied in with River Song and all of that, I thought was just fantastic. And the fact that obviously the seeds were planted quite some time ago.
Yeah.
They'd clearly set it up several
so they
years
had
before.
River Song like way back.
Exactly, and they just kept dropping it in every now and again, kind of like at the right time, and it just paid off brilliantly. And of course, as soon as that era kind of came to an end and she was no longer in it, they introduced Clara, and it's like, right, we need something that's as good as that.
Yeah.
And it just felt so contrived and forced, and they've not been able to recreate it. And the whole Impossible Girl thing, it's kind of like you're just trying to recapture that whole girl who waited.
Yeah, and actually, if they're going, and so actually she's always been around in the whole of the Doctor timeline ever, and she's occasionally rescued him without him noticing.
Yes.
Doesn't that take away everything that he's done ever?
Pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what they do next. I think possibly if they don't get this next series right, they probably should give up, and they won't because it's too much of a big money spinner.
It is. What they should probably do is at least take a couple of years break.
Yeah, because it's just not...
I
don't like Capaldi's Doctor, and that's not because I don't think Capaldi's any good, because actually he is very good at it, but that's part of why I don't like it. I don't like him. He's not likeable.
No, he's hard to like.
Yeah, Matt Smith was likeable, Tennant was likeable, Eccleston kind of was less so.
Eccleston's better on rewatch.
Yeah, so I haven't rewatched any of his because I was actually really pissed off with him for doing one series and then quitting.
Yeah, I really didn't like him first time round, but on rewatch he was much better than I gave him credit for.
Yeah.
David Tennant, I would agree, is a good Doctor. I would argue anytime that he's the best Doctor. I don't think he is.
No, I think he's
think he is.
Yeah, I think it's too subjective to say any of them are the best.
Exactly. Also, it was more that basically for me, David Tennant essentially has 4 facial expressions, and all of them are gurning.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like he just kind of like is just pulling stupid kind of gurning faces too often in it for me. Yeah.
The amount of people he gets into trouble, he gets everybody
he meets into trouble. Yeah, he frequently gets entire civilizations killed.
Yeah, or he'll just get them erased from time, or blown up, or he'll...
That's why Madman in a Box is one of the best descriptions that anybody's come up with.
Actually, he is possibly the villain, and that would be an interesting way to view it. It'd probably be an interesting way to write it. In that he is kind of a supervillain, he's almost kind of Despicable Me guy.
He's Gru.
Gru, yeah. Sort of flying around in space, just causing mayhem everywhere.
I've now just got sort of images of just
Him
like
with
hundreds of millions pouring out of the TARDIS, which I think would be very, very funny.
Yeah, but
especially if they're at the controls.
Yeah, oh god. But yeah, he is.
Are we living in the future and we just haven't noticed? Where's all the spaceships and all the time travellers? Has Stephen Moffat only got 3 ideas? Tell us what you think in the comments below. Check out the song for Nick, which inspired this particular discussion. Check out our other stuff over there. There'll be some related things and whatever YouTube's managed to put in. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, and you can download all of our stuff from the website. Bye!